Welcome to Ouch. Was that a ghost? This podcast may contain graphic material, which some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
Help me.
Now that we covered that, here's your host, Liz.
Welcome back to Ouch, Was That a Ghost? This week, we're diving into a serial killer because we haven't done one of those in a while. And this one has been requested for a bit, but it took me a minute to do him because he's super annoying. Today, we're going to be talking about Dennis Lynn Rader. He's a serial killer that named himself BTK for bind, torture, and kill. He was responsible for terrorizing Kansas and surrounding states for decades. He lived this dual life as a husband, father, scout leader, president of his church's council. He worked many different jobs, including installing security systems with ADT for people who were trying to keep, little did they know at the time, they were trying to keep him out. He did all this while stalking and murdering at least 10 people, some of whom were children as young as 9 years old. There is children and animal murder in this, and if that's not for you, I totally get it. Come back next week. As always, I'm not going to delve super into the details with the children or any of the victims. If you want to know specific details or look up photos, you can do that on your own. A big theme with Dennis is his air of superiority, his ego. He seemed to have derived pleasure by taunting his victims, as well as the police and the community. Later on, we'll discuss how he even sends packages like cereal boxes with like a bound Barbie doll inside, like, oh, I'm a serial killer. And poems he writes. He sucks. Dennis Lynn Rader was born to Dorothea May and William Rader on March 9th, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas. He was the eldest of the 4 boys that the Raders would have. While Dennis was still young, the family moved to Wichita, Kansas. The boys were raised in a Lutheran church. The parents worked a lot. His mother was a bookkeeper for a local supermarket. And he would later say his mother didn't give him enough attention. And his father, who was an ex-Marine, later worked at a Kansas gas company. Dennis Lynn was raised in a strict household. Not abusive, there's a big distinction. Dennis Lynn was said to be an introvert at school. He would keep to himself. He enjoyed a lot of the things most boys do, like comics, fishing, Cub Scouts, which is where he learned to tie all sorts of knots, while he also had a lot of interests outside of the norm, like the famous sign with harming and murdering animals. And he would later say that from a young age, he had fantasies involving trapped and helpless women. He would spy on neighbors, and he himself would cross-dress at times with undergarments he had stolen from the women he was spying on. There was talk of how he may have seen like a dirty magazine when he was a child, and this may have influenced him. He started acting out these autoerotic asphyxiation, tying himself up, And while he was in high school, he worked in a grocery store. He graduated and went to Kansas Wesleyan University for a year, and then he ended up dropping out. Dennis, following his father's footsteps, joined the military, the Air Force, in 1966 as a way to avoid being drafted by the Army. And he would later say that while he was in the Air Force, he learned about sex, losing his virginity the first time to a sex worker. He was honorably discharged in 1970, and after his discharge, he purchased a house in Park City, Kansas, which is a suburb of Wichita. He got a job at the supermarket where his mother worked, and Dennis went on to marry Paula Dietz on May 22nd, 1971, and they went on to have 2 children, a boy and a girl. It was an ideal family from the outside, except for Dennis still spying on women through windows and still stealing some of their clothes and wearing them as he watched through their windows. He went on to work for the Coleman Company, like the outdoor stuff, like camping gear stuff, in 1972 and in 73, which was where he probably crossed paths with 2 of his later victims. Dennis Lynn would go back to college and get an electrical engineering associate's degree, and he was also studying administration of justice. Dennis got a job at an aviation company because Wichita was the aviation capital. They had all sorts of production coming out of there. They had big companies like Cessna, where he worked, And then he was eventually let go in 1973. And this gave him free time to go deeper into his, as he called them, fantasies. He began stalking, or trolling, as he called it, potential victims. He set his eyes on the Otero family, specifically the mother and daughter. And Dennis had actually worked at Cessna with the mother before. The Otero family had only recently moved to Wichita, Kansas, so the father could work fixing aircrafts. If that was the career you wanted, this was the place to do it. The Otero family consisted of Joseph Sr., who was born in Puerto Rico. He was also a military man, retired Air Force, and he was said to be a very talented boxer, so he was in good shape. He was 38, and his wife, Julia, she was well-liked in the community, like her husband. She was a great mom, and she trained in judo. She was 33 years old. And their children, Charlie, the oldest, who was 15, then there was Danny, and then there was Carmen, and then there was Josephine, who they called Josie, and Joseph II, or they called Joey, who was 9 years old. Dennis spent days watching the girls, learning their routine, all leading up to this day on January 15th, 1974, when Dennis could act out, as he called it, his fantasy. He went around the back of the Otero house, he cut the phone line, and he waited by the back door. This was in the morning, around the time where everyone's leaving for school. And little Joseph, or Joey, opened the door, and Dennis rushed the door. He pulled out a gun, and Dennis was surprised to find that Mr. Otero was home, because this wasn't the schedule he was used to seeing. He would have usually been at work by now, but he was hurt from a recent car accident. 3 of the children had already left for school. Joseph and Joey were the only kids still at home with their mom and dad, and they were getting ready to go to school. Dennis made up this story about being a wanted man who needed a car and food, and he told the family to put the dog outside. Dennis, still holding the family at gunpoint, forced the family into the bedroom, where he tied family members up, and he tried to make Mr. Otero comfortable, propping up a pillow and stuff to make him more comfortable because of his cracked ribs from that recent car accident, which is an odd thing to do because right after, Dennis attempted to strangle the parents multiple times. Like, he would think that they were dead, and then he would re-strangle or put a bag over their head. He's just a fucking monster. Julia came to and was begging to save her child, and he would just strangle her again. He murdered little Joey, who was only 9 years old, strangling him, putting bags and clothing over his head so he couldn't, bite through the bags. And later, a chair was found next to Joey's body, as if this sick fuck watched Joey as he passed away. He then took the 11-year-old Josie to the basement and hung her from a pipe. Semen was later found at the scene, but it is said that she didn't appear to be sexually assaulted. Like I said, I'm not going super into detail. You guys can do that on your own if you want to. And then Dennis went through the house. He cleaned up a bit, and he took a few of the family's items, like a radio and a watch. And then he took the family's car keys and drove their car and just parked it at a supermarket and then just walked to his car. When the other 3 Otero children came home that day, they were the ones that found the scene. Obviously, the police came. They collected what evidence they could, like the semen, and they took notes of the knots that were used because they weren't regular knots. They thought that maybe the family was targeted for some reason, and this did freak out the neighborhood because this shouldn't have happened in a quiet neighborhood. 4 members of a family murdered during daytime hours. People started locking their doors or installing alarm systems. And speaking of alarms, in 1974, Rader started working at ADT, the security system installing company, and he would actually be one of the people that would go out to homes to install the security alarms. Dennis continued to look for victims, or as he called them, projects, and he would follow them around town. And he decided on 21-year-old Catherine Bright, a college student. He followed her around, learned her routine. And on April 4th, 1974, Dennis broke into Catherine Bright's home and just waited for her. She later returned, but not alone as Dennis had planned. Catherine was with her 19-year-old brother, Kevin. Dennis brandished a weapon and told them he was a wanted man and just needed a car to try to ease them. Both of them were tied up, but the idiot didn't bring enough to tie both of them up because he was only planning on tying Catherine up. So he used some stuff from around Catherine's house. They were placed in separate bedrooms and bound to beds. Dennis attempted to strangle Kevin, but Kevin managed to get free and he was fighting back. And then the little bitch Dennis shot Kevin in the head, and Kevin just collapsed. Dennis then went to Catherine, who fought. This girl fought. and Dennis heard something from the other room. He went to check on it, and he found that Kevin was back up. Again, Kevin and Dennis went at it. He was like fighting Dennis off with a bullet in his head. And then Dennis shot Kevin again right in the face. Then Dennis returned to Catherine and tried to strangle her, but she was such a badass, she was fighting so hard. Fuckface then pulled out a knife and stabbed her in the stomach. Dennis lost all control, and he just went to go check on Kevin, and he found the front door wide open, and Kevin was running down the street to get help for himself and his sister. Dennis quickly cleaned up and ran back to his car that was parked down the street. Unfortunately, Catherine did not survive. She died a few hours after getting to the hospital. But Kevin did survive, and he was able to give a description of his sister's killer. But it wasn't much to go on because Kevin described the attacker as a, quote, average size guy, bushy mustache, which is, in the 70s, that's a lot of people. But he did say that he had psychotic eyes. They had that description, but not much else, so this wasn't really connected to the Oteros. 3 men later were picked up, suspected of being responsible for the Otero murders, and this wouldn't do for Dennis. This was October 1974. This was about 9 months after 4 of the Oteros were murdered. A call was placed to the Wichita Eagle. The caller directed them to a book in the Wichita Public Library. Inside the book, they found a letter that gave details about the Otero murder that only the killer would know. And another thing to know about this note, it had a lot of grammatical errors, wrong spelling. The paper was asked not to print it by police, but a rival paper did eventually get their hands on it and printed it a few months later. He's so annoying. I'll read an excerpt. Quote, "I'm sorry this happened to society. They are the ones who suffer the most. It hard to control myself. You probably call me psychotic with sexual perversion. Hang up. When this monster enter my brain, I will never know, but it here to stay. How does one cure himself? If you ask for help, that you have killed 4 people, they will laugh or hit the panic button and call the cops. I can't stop it, so the monster go on and hurt me as well as society. Society can be thankful that there are ways for people like me to relieve myself at a time by daydreams of some victim being torture and being mine. It a big complicated game, my friend, of the monster play, putting victims' number down, follow them, checking up on them, waiting in the dark, waiting. The pressure is great, and sometimes he run the game to his liking. Maybe you can stop him. I can't. He has already chosen his next victim, or victims. I don't know who they are yet. The next day, after I read the paper, I will know. But it too late. Good luck hunting." And then he doesn't sign his name. He signed it, "Yours truly, guiltily." And then he goes on to add, "P.S. Since sex criminals do not change their M.O., or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code word for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You see, he added again. They will be on the next victim." After this letter was published, obviously people were terrified in the area. Then 3 years passed, presumably because he did have a child in 1973, so he might have been helping raise his family, or he could have been doing things that weren't connected to him. So March 17th, 1977, Dennis had a potential victim he was stalking, or a project, as he called it, and when he went to her house, she wasn't home. Can you imagine that? So that day, Dennis saw a young boy who was about 5 walking to the store for a sick mother to grab her a can of soup. It sounds weird, but it's the 80s. I did that at 5. It was a different time. So Dennis stopped this young boy and asked if he recognized the people in a photo that Dennis showed him. The photo was of Dennis's wife and child, and the little boy said no. And the little boy continued home to bring his mother the soup. Dennis saw where the little boy went, and about 15 minutes later, the little boy and his brother heard a knock at the door. They ran to open the door, and there stood Dennis. He told the boys that he was a private detective and again showed a picture, asked if they recognized the people in the photo. By then, their mother, Shirley Vian, got out of bed to see what was going on. Dennis pulled a gun and told Shirley that he had a problem with sexual fantasies. He moved the boys to the bathroom and put some toys and blankets in there and ended up tying them to the bathroom door and the sink. And he moved furniture in front of the bathroom door, trapping the children inside. Which is such an odd thing because he takes these extra steps right before he knows he's going to do something to these people. Even with Shirley, he allowed her to have a cigarette. At some point, Shirley, who was sick, and this was happening, threw up. And Dennis, again, this strange, almost caring actions. I don't understand why. He got her some water before tying her up. Maybe he likes to make them feel calm before terror. I don't really understand. Then he ended up putting a bag over her head and strangling her. The children who were still in the bathroom during all of this were screaming and yelling. The house phone rang, which spooked Dennis. The phone call probably saved the children's lives. I can't even imagine the trauma that these children went through. One of the boys actually saw through the crack what was happening to his mother. This waste of air Dennis had murdered 24-year-old Shirley Vian and left these children traumatized and without a mother. Police arrived at the scene. They found semen at the scene, which great evidence, but they need a way to test it and a person to test it against, which they didn't have. People in the area hearing about this obviously started checking their phone lines when they got home because that seemed to be one of the killer's trademarks. And people in the area, specifically women, were being more cautious. A few months later, on December 8th, 1977, Dennis, who had been stalking his next victim, who he just chose at random one night when he saw her walk into her house, he, like the other women, he learned their routine, and he ended up breaking into the home of 25-year-old Nancy Fox. She wasn't home at the time, and he waited for her to return home from work. When she did, he surprised her brandishing a gun, and he told her that he had a sexual problem and needed to bind and rape her. He also let her smoke a cigarette. And with Nancy, he allowed her to partially undress herself in the bathroom, which is the only known victim to do that. He then forced her into the bed, tied her up, and then Dennis undressed himself and started confessing his involvement in the Otero murders to her, and then he went on to murder Nancy Fox. The next morning, Dennis went to a payphone and reported the murder he just committed the night before of Nancy Fox in her home. Authorities went to Nancy's house and found her deceased body still bound. They also found some semen on a nightgown that was found near Nancy's body, presumably the killer's. Police now held the killer's voice from that call that was placed from the payphone, so at least they had something to compare that against if they had a suspect. The next month, in January of 1978, Dennis sent a poem to the Wichita Eagle-Beacon about the murder of Shirley Vian, like a mocking poem. He's such a dick. The next month, a letter from Dennis was sent to Cake TV, Kake, about how he was the one that murdered Shirley Vian and Nancy Fox. He's such a piece of shit. He included a poem titled, "Oh, Death to Nancy." And in the letter, he asked, quote, "How many times do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or some national attention?" And then he went on to offer some nickname ideas. Ugh. I like the following. How about you? The BTK Strangler, the Wichita Strangler, Poetic Strangler, the Bond Age Strangler, or Psycho the Wichita Hangman, the Wichita Executioner, the Garrote Phantom, or the Asphyxiator. He's such a loser. This whole letter was filled with grammatical errors again. He mocked his victims. This was just Dennis Lynn seeking attention. After this letter, the chief of police let the public know that there was a serial killer out there. The public panicking, Dennis is still out in the community he held a bunch of different jobs that allowed him access to the public, like the ADT installer. He was a census taker at a point, a dog catcher. And I did see that it was reported that he put dogs down without cause. Like, what a prick. And after the release of, there's a serial killer out there, more people started installing alarm systems like ADT, where he worked, and he would enter homes to install these systems. The next year, in April 1978, Dennis breaks into the home of 63-year-old Anna Williams, who he had been stalking for weeks, learning her schedule. But on this night, Anna got home later than usual. Dennis waited a few hours and left upset, and he did end up stealing some jewelry and some money on his way out of her house. When Anna Williams did return, she found her front door open, her phone line had been cut, and later on would find binding items in the house, like belts and ropes, that were not hers. Anna's granddaughter, 24-year-old Rebecca, who usually stayed the night, also happened to change her schedule that night, and some think that her granddaughter may have been the actual target. Dennis later sent a sketch of a woman hanging, thought to be what he would have done if she had been home that night. as well as a poem titled, "Oh, Anna, Why Didn't You Appear?" Anna, rightfully freaked out, moved out of state soon after. In August 1979, some of that audio from Dennis Rader's phone call that he placed at the payphone was released, and tips started flooding in, over 100 in the first day. But I mean, that's a lot to go through, and that didn't seem to go anywhere. On April 27th, 1985, Dennis, who was at a scouting outing, made up some sort of excuse that he didn't feel well. And then he made this sort of weird alibi thing. He went to a bowling alley, ordered a beer, swished it around in his mouth, and then got some on his clothes. And then he called a cab, acting like he was drunk, and took a cab to the home of 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, who he had lived on the same street as her for like 30 years. He broke into her house and cut her phone line and found she wasn't home, so he waited for her in her closet. She had been out that evening playing bingo and having dinner with her boyfriend, and when Maureen Hedge did return home, she was with a man. So Dennis stayed hidden until after the man left, and then Dennis manually strangled her. He stripped her clothes off, wrapped her in a blanket, and put Maureen in her own trunk, and then he drove her to his church, brought her down in the basement, still wrapped in the blanket, and then he took her body out and posed her and took photos. Then Dennis dumped Maureen's body in a ditch and covered it with brush, where she would be found 8 days later. Around this time, law enforcement had opened a new task force specifically for hunting the BTK killer. They were employing the then new resources like DNA testing, profiling, and this group was known as the Ghostbusters. About 5 months later, on the morning of September 16th, 1986, 28-year-old Vicki Wegerly received a knock at her door. It was Dennis Rader, who claimed he was with the phone company. So she let him in, and after he cut the phone line, he brandished a firearm. Vicki did put up a fight, but Dennis overpowered her and bound her and strangled her. And then he took pictures. Vicki's husband later returned after Dennis left and found his unattended 2-year-old and found his wife on the bedroom floor. He called an ambulance, but unfortunately, even with the revival attempts, Vicki was pronounced dead. This wouldn't be connected to Dennis for years. Her husband was looked at as the prime suspect for years and years. Vicki's husband did later receive a letter from a man who said he was the BTK, almost like taunting him. About 5 years later, on January 19th, 1991, I'm not even going to go into this dumb alibi scout shit he did again. He snuck away and snuck back in is the gist of it. Dennis went to the home of 62-year-old Dolores Davis. He lurked around her house, and he's an idiot, so he couldn't figure out how to break in. So he ended up grabbing a concrete block and smashed a window, which of course alerted Dolores. Again with his dumbass, "I'm a wanted man. I need food, car, money." He restrained her and strangled her. As his norm, he took some personal items from his victim. Then he put Dolores in a blanket and put her in her own car, dumped her body, and then he realized he lost his gun and had to go back to her house to retrieve it. Fucking idiot. And then he moved Dolores to another spot, this time under a bridge, where she would be found 13 days later. This happening in 1991. Years passed, and in 2004, this is almost 20 years since the last communication, and it was thought, is the BTK in jail, dead, in a mental facility, who knows? And Dennis heard that was what was being floated around, and that didn't work for him. He needs attention. So on March 19th, 2004, a letter was received at the Wichita Eagle claiming that he, Bill Thomas Kilman, with the initials BTK, he's so stupid, was responsible for the 1986 murder of Vicki Wegerly. Also enclosed was a photocopy of Vicki Wegerly's driver's license and 3 photos from the crime scene. They had not previously connected BTK to her murder, but now that he connected himself, they realized that they had DNA from that crime scene from under Vicki's fingernails. During that year, Dennis left packages throughout Wichita. Some were puzzles or IDs or photocopies of IDs, photographs from crime scenes, poems he wrote. He's a fucking idiot. Or bound dolls, some in cereal boxes, like, "Oh, I'm a serial killer." Out of the 12 communications he left, one of the packages that was dropped was caught on CCTV when he tossed a cereal box with a bound doll inside into a truck bed. And on the video footage they saw that it was a black Jeep Cherokee. And they kept communicating back and forth. Like, Dennis would leave packages or letters. He'd either leave them around town or send them to radio stations or TV stations. And authorities could reply back in the newspaper. And in 2005, Dennis sent a message to a TV station with a question asking the police, if he sends a floppy disk, can they trace it? And the police responded via the newspaper that, oh, it can't be traced. He's such an idiot. Dennis was like, oh, okay, they can't lie to me. If you're a cop, you have to say you're a cop. So gullible Dennis sent a floppy disk into a local TV station, who in turn handed it to the authorities. The police got right to work. They checked for deleted metadata. And from the floppy disk, they found the heading, the Christ Lutheran Church, last modified by Dennis, which happened to be where a man named Dennis Lynn Rader served as a congregational president. So now they finally had a name. And they drove by Dennis Rader's house. And in the driveway was a vehicle, the same vehicle that was caught on CCTV dropping that package off from the BTK killer. But they wanted to have concrete evidence before they arrested him. So they got a warrant for Dennis Rader's daughter's medical records in order to compare the DNA that they had from the Wegerly crime scene to Dennis Rader's daughter's pap smear test to see if there was a familial match. And it was a match. Rader was arrested on February 25th, 2005, and charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. He is suspected of having more victims, but he denies that. He was named as a suspect in the murder of 22-year-old Shauna Beth Garber. Rader was later ruled out of Shawn Garber's murder. And there was also 16-year-old Cynthia Dawn Kinney, who went missing in 1976, who was last seen at a laundromat near where Dennis was known to install alarms, but without more evidence that he was there on that day, on the day that she went missing. They didn't have enough, and they still don't. They did find notations in Dennis's journals that said words like Kinney, like the victim's last name, and laundromat, and PJ Bad Wash Day, along with Dennis's admission that he had a fantasy of kidnapping someone from a laundromat. Her body has yet to be found, and there were other sketches and clues to other possible victims found in Dennis Rader's things. But he is still the prime suspect in Cynthia Kinney's disappearance. But again, never charged. It's been speculated that Rader may not be taking credit for her murder because some states have death penalties, like Oklahoma, where Cynthia Kinney went missing. So in Kansas, at the time of the trial, there was no death penalty, and Rader pled guilty to all 10 counts of murder. Thankfully, Rader's wife was granted an emergency divorce, no waiting period. And just to be clear, his family, his wife and children seemed to be victims as well, unaware of what this waste of space was doing. The house where Dennis Lynn resided and his family has since been demolished. And Dennis Lynn is serving 10 consecutive life sentences for the murders of 38-year-old Joseph Otero, 9-year-old Joseph Otero Jr., 11-year-old Josephine Otero, 33-year-old Julia Otero, 21-year-old Catherine Bright, 24-year-old Shirley Ruth Vian, 25-year-old Nancy Jo Fox, 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, 28-year-old Vicky Wegerly, and 62-year-old Dolores Johnson Davis. The now 81-year-old, wheelchair-bound Dennis Lynn is being housed at the maximum security El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. His earliest release date is not until 2180, when he would be 235 years old. His daughter, Kerry Rawson, published a book called A Serial Killer's Daughter, My Story of Faith, Love, and Overcoming in 2019. And she also was in a documentary titled My Father, the BTK Killer. And she has publicly said that her father most likely murdered more than 10 people. Dennis Lynn Rader has always been a coward, preying on small animals, children, elderly, or just unsuspecting victims. He's a pick-me serial killer that left a legacy of being a joke. Like those letters taunting, they just made him look pathetic. And the fact that he had to name himself is just sad. This loser ruined so many lives. I hope he's rotting. Ugh. I really can't stand him. I hope he has a long, miserable life because he does spend most of his time in his room alone. I think he's only allowed out for an hour a day and he's sitting in a wheelchair. So I just hope he has a super miserable existence going on. And I hate that he was able to name himself. I wish that they made a ridiculous name and stuck it to him. I don't even know one that would work. One that's bad enough for him. If you guys have any ideas on a terrible nickname we can try to get going for him, let me know. Yeah, but he just sucks so bad. If you guys have any requests, any personal stories for listener tales, feel free to send them in at ouchwasthataghost@yahoo.com, or you can contact me on social media. I mostly check Facebook. I don't really check the other ones as much. I should. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening. If you need more content or just want to help support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com and search Ouch, Was That a Ghost? If you need some snazzy merch, you can find it at crowdmade.com by searching Ouch, Was That a Ghost? If you have a story you'd like to share, you can email it to ouchwasthataghost@yahoo.com. You can also find us on Facebook and all the other social media platforms under Ouch, Was That a Ghost?
Help me.
All links can also be found on ouchwasthataghost.com.